All right, this is the bi-weekly meeting of the Storage Special Interest Group for Kubernetes. Today is May 25, 2017. As a reminder, this meeting is public and recorded. Today on the agenda, we're going to go over status planning for the SIG. We're going to take a look at the PRs that people think have not been getting attention. If you have any PRs, please add them to the agenda. I'm going to paste the agenda doc into the chat window. Then we're going to go over some design reviews, and finally we're going to talk about onboarding docs and process. If you have anything else you want to add to the agenda, please add it to this document. Just paste it into the chat. And let me share my screen and we'll start going over the planning doc. Okay. First up is the Nfs Wedging Issue. I believe, do you have an update on this? I think you sent out a proposal.
No, I haven't sent out a proposal. I had some discussion on the linked ticket though, like this thing. So I just got busy. So I'm still planning to send a proposal at least for this thing. So, but.
Okay. So I think, well, one thing to remember for everyone is that next week is code freeze. June 1st is code freeze. Given that, I don't think we're going to get this into 1.7. Not a huge deal. I think we'll just prioritize it higher for 1.8. In the meantime, you can continue working on the design.
Yeah. So the issue is back. It's just that we cannot solve it by scanning proc mounts. That's what was discussed, and we had to kind of solve it by having some kind of go routine pool or something like that.
Makes sense. Okay. Stabilizing AWS support for EBS. Jing, any updates on this? Don't think Jing is with us. I don't think there is too many updates there. I believe the only plans this quarter were to add testing. So I'm just going to mark that as started. Stabilizing Azure support. I saw a couple of PRs that you sent my way, Hwamin. Are there any updates here? Looks like Hwamin is not with us for the Azure updates. We'll keep that there as started. Out of tree volume plugins, I sent out an email yesterday to the storage SIG. The document has been moved to a new repository, which is container-storage interface. I will post that into the group chat. So anybody who wants to participate in talking about container storage interface, you can take a look at what we have as the draft proposal. If you have any discussions, feel free to open up issues in that repo to address whatever your concerns are. We'll talk about this later in the meeting today. Next up, local ephemeral storage support. I believe Jing is working on this. She's been working on it for the last couple of weeks. I think she's polishing up her PR for alpha support. Next up is local storage support. Michelle, are you on the line?
Yeah, I'm here. So the API PR is submitted. So now I just have the plugin PR left, and also the external provisioner as well.
Cool. And the external provisioner can go in after code freeze. So
yeah, that's correct. So the main thing I'm prioritizing right now is the plugin, volume plugin.
Cool. Next up, testing. Jeff or Aaron, or either of you on the
line? I don't know if Aaron's on. This is Jeff.
I'm on. I just couldn't find the mute on my phone. So go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, shoot. My thing's I've been having trouble with Zoom on a new laptop, Saad, so I'm on my old one right now, and it's doing something strange. Anyway, there's not a big update to report. John is still on paternity leave, and I am working on 2 issues that, one that Jay submitted about testing the storage plugins to make sure they work with larger write sizes and read sizes, and that they create files of the correct size. Similar to the mount testing we do in volumes.go, where we run through the dozen plugins, it's going to be similar to that, but it's going to do more stressful I/O. And then Michael has a similar PR about streaming I/Os and making sure PDs work correctly. But I was going to expand his issue a little bit and cover all the plugins and make sure they're working in streaming I/O of various sizes.
Sweet.
And so I've sort of architected the way of doing that test, and I'm just going through the details of actually getting it to work now.
Awesome. Are you blocked on anything at the moment?
Just on myself.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Okay.
And just a reminder for everyone on the call, we do have a meeting on Friday. This Friday, it's a bi-monthly meeting. Anyone wanting to join and help out with tests, you're more than welcome, and I will be sure to record it and send it out this week.
Awesome. Thank you. In the chat, Luis asked why the CSI doc was being moved into the repo. It's mainly to make it easier to collaborate. Now that we've kind of moved out of the rapid iteration phase, the idea is that more people can help contribute to it, and it's good to have it in a place where you have revision history and everything. And cool. Next up, cloud provider storage metrics. That was already done. Snapshots. Has Jing joined us, or Tomas on the line?
I'm on the line. I'm sorry to report that we haven't moved much since the last time. So it looks like we might not be ready in 1.7.
Okay. So do you want to give context on what's going on here? Because I think there's a lot of work that's been going on. It's not like you guys have been sitting around.
There's been many discussions, and we captured them in many texts, but we haven't agreed completely on the API itself. And it turned out that perhaps we might try to do something slightly different. So now I'm trying to work on something like proof of concept. That's it. Like I would write something that would actually do the snapshots, and we can discuss on something like MVP. And we can discuss about it, and from this specific thing, try to come with a final proposal.
So it sounds to me like you guys kind of closed in on 2 objects. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, because that seems to be like the most viable solution, and one that might be most extensible one. There are still some opinions that this is perhaps not the best solution. I don't know. I'm not experienced enough in API to be able to decide this. So
okay. Well, for what it's worth, we had an internal review on our side, and the 2 object solution sounds pretty sound to us. I think the 2 open questions we had from our side, actually 3 open questions. One was around whether the API objects should be first-party objects within the Kubernetes core, or whether they should be third-party resources. And then the second kind of pigtails off of that is whether the controller itself should be part of the core Kubernetes core, like part of the PVPVC, or an external controller. And then finally, we spoke to some folks on SIG apps, and they were very much interested in this feature and want to basically have a sign-off before it proceeds any further, because things like stateful set very much depend on it. In particular, they're thinking about things like if you have a stateful set that gets upgraded from one version to the next, snapshotting is probably something that they want to incorporate into that workflow. And they want to make sure that the design that this group has come up with aligns with how they would use it from their end, basically the end user perspective. So I believe, talking to Jing, she's going to set up a presentation to the SIG apps group early in June, I believe the first week of June, because this coming week, Monday is a holiday. The following Monday is the first next meeting of the SIG apps group. And so she'll present something to them. That said, we're probably not going to get an alpha for 1.7, and that's okay. Depending on what we decide, whether this is going to be a third-party resource in tree, out of tree, it's possible that we could work on this completely out of band from the primary Kubernetes release. So let's keep carrying on there.
So Saad, real quick on this, we have been marching towards this as a 1.7 feature, and I don't know that we're necessarily off track for it either. You know, there was a lot of discussion at the face-to-face about, you know, one object versus two objects, and then we had kind of a little bit of a derail on if we should go with the sub resource or not. I think we've kind of regrouped, and we're back to like the two object design that we discussed pretty extensively at the face-to-face. Tomasz has prototyped or is working on the prototypes for the API objects and for the controller.
Nice.
And the development is going, well, and by, all means we should have at least a proof of concept here in the next couple of days. It's
nice.
And it's one of those things that every time we have a call, like there's so much feedback and excitement about it that it becomes difficult to determine where we really are in the development. I think that we are still shooting to get this code done by next Wednesday, and we have a sheet tracking it. We have, other people have mentioned that they would like to help participate in it, and we do have a sheet tracking it if other people want to go and sign up for like testing or documentation or other bits of it.
So I think the only problem is in order for us to get this into the Kubernetes code base, we need to get sign off, not just from this group. I think we've now arrived at consensus within the SIG storage group about what it should look like. But it turns out, there's more actors within our space, right? We have to get sign off on where the API should live and whether this design works for the larger for SIG apps, basically. So we basically need 2 more sign-offs to happen before this code can get in. And the first sign-off, the API sign-off, we may be able to get within the next week. But the second one from SIG apps looks like we've missed the boat because the next meeting is going to be after code freeze.
What's the sign-off? What sign-off do they actually need for the API changes?
For API changes, whether the API changes, whether snapshots are going to live as part of the core Kubernetes API or whether it's going to be third-party resources. So this is kind of a tension within API, trying to figure out how much is enough for the Kubernetes core code for the kernel, basically for the nucleus, and every new object that we add has a higher bar for why it should be in the core. And so I think for snapshots, it might be difficult for us to make the claim that this is critical enough a component for it to be part of the core Kubernetes API. And if we want to go down that route, we have to provide that justification. Otherwise, it's going to be a third-party resource. And then,
for the sake of time and actually, being able to deliver on this, can we just say it's going to be a third-party resource and promote it to core later?
That would be totally
would that save us from needing a sign-off?
Actually, it would give us 2 benefits. One is it kind of decouples us from the Kubernetes release, because I believe third-party resources can be added without modifying the core Kubernetes code.
And aren't third-party resources, are they in alpha or are they in beta? They're not fully in Kube either, right?
I'm not sure what the current state of third-party resources is.
Okay.
Does someone else, is Eric Garris maybe on the line? Okay, we can check on that. The other part that falls out of this is like, okay, even if you have the API out of tree as a third-party resource, the second question is, well, where does the logic that drives this live? If it's going to be part of the core Kubernetes PV/PVC controller, then it needs to be checked in tree. The argument can be made that if this is if the API is going to be completely out of tree, then maybe the controller should be managed out of tree as well.
Yeah. And so that came up on our last discussion. So we've been having calls a couple times a week going over this, and that particular topic did come up last time, and I think we're about 80-20 on it living out of tree. If our API objects are forced to be out of tree, we might as well keep the controller out of tree as well. So maybe that simplifies everything. Maybe we just say we have third-party API objects and we have the controller out of tree. And
so if we can do that, I mean, that would be wonderful. It would give us two things. One is the ability to go to alpha quicker, and two, we don't have to be tied to the Kubernetes lifecycle. And then in the future, it kind of leaves the opening for us if we decide that we want to bring it back in tree, we want it to be a first-party resource, we can do so in the future. Yeah,
that seems like the perfect solution to me. That gives us the opportunity to try to deliver it by the 1.7 release, or be pretty close on it. And if we want to, if it becomes something that wants to go in tree, eventually we can move it in tree.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I think
if I may add something, if we start with out of tree, then it's pretty hard to move it into the tree, because people will start using it. And half of the objects will be out of the tree, half of them will be in tree, and the controller explodes.
Yeah. I mean, so I think it'll be part of the messaging about what we want to call it. If we call it alpha or a prototype, technically we have the ability to deprecate it and move it around. But in reality, you're absolutely right. If we actually have customers that start depending on the behavior, we kind of get stuck with having to maintain backwards compatibility. So it's something we should think through. Good point.
But I think it's a little bit looser of a promise if it's alpha, right? I mean, we have an alpha out of tree feature. If people are using it, they can continue using it as an alpha out of tree feature. But now all of a sudden we have in-tree support for it. And if they want to migrate over to that, I don't think that's a big deal. Right.
I think the other observation is, if we're solid on this assumption that the storage plugin go out of tree, or that's desirable, the same logic would seem to apply to snapshots, because they're so closely related.
Yeah, we just have Michael join in. I'm going to give him a quick recap. So we were talking about snapshots. The discussion around snapshots is whether we're going to make it for 1.7 or not. The big open questions right now are, one, around the API, whether the API should be part of the core Kubernetes core, or it should be a third-party resource. And then falling from that is whether the controller itself should be part of the core Kubernetes code or be outside of the Kubernetes core. And then the third question is around SIG apps approval. And so I think folks would still like to get this in for 1.7, but we are 1 week away from code freeze. The first question around whether it should be in tree, out of tree, if we go out of tree, it kind of decouples us from the Kubernetes release. You can have the controller out of tree, you could have the API as a third-party resource, and theoretically around the time that 1.7 comes out, you could have a out of tree, something that you can kick the tires on. Something that Jan brought up is, well, if you do that, people are going to start using it that way. And if in the future you want to bring it into the kernel, into the core Kubernetes code base, you're going to have this backward compatibility issue. But Brad,
it's alpha. There is no backward compatibility issue.
Yeah, but people start using it.
It's alpha. There is no backwards compatibility issue.
True.
But the other thing is that my concern, and I voiced this on a meeting earlier this week about snapshots, is because of the need to be able to move snapshots from namespace to namespace, and just the risk of what we're doing to have that be out of core seems like something we really should think about from a security standpoint. Enabling that type of API as an add-on. And then the other thing is third-party resources. I think, Luis, I know you said you were checking that, I think are also alpha. So I know that there's a strong desire to have this in, but are we pushing something through in a way that we're not going to maintain that long-term, because also third-party resources might not be around?
Can you articulate the security concern a little bit cleaner? Because I'm not sure where that actually would be.
Well, we talked about the API being so important here because we have to be able to, recreate a snapshot or possibly move it to a different namespace, which is something that doesn't happen today in Kubernetes. And so doing that outside of core seems, I don't know, that just seems like something we'd fundamentally want to have within Kubernetes and have
to bake and incubate it before moving into something that we actually promise to support. Right? I mean, like, there's a huge benefit in my mind to, especially on something that's been so talked about and debated and somewhat controversial, to incubating it outside of the core API, and that we can see what works and what doesn't, and if it is broken or if there is issues with it, then it's not part of our core. We can deal with it and then move it into core after it's pretty well vetted.
So the other thing to keep in mind is that the component that you're talking about, Aaron, about transferring ownership between namespaces, that component I don't believe is planned to be delivered in the alpha version. And when it is going to be implemented, you're right, it should not be a third party. It should not be an external controller. It'll be something that has to be something that Kubernetes controls.
Right.
Access privileges, but it'll also have to be something that is more generic than just snapshots, right? We have non-namespaced resources like PVs that could potentially benefit from this. So that could be just a separate project.
All right, so it feels to me that there's a lot of desire to have snapshots in a place that isn't just someone's GitHub repo, so people can start kicking the tires, so to speak, and using it. This feels very much, I think we all agree that snapshots is in an alpha state for a few reasons. One is that one of the main users and consumers of snapshots should probably be the apps team, and they have not signed off on it yet. Two, it has gone through a lot of conversation and back and forth, and I don't know if anyone yet feels certain that we've locked down the API. And I think the only thing that we're all certain about is that snapshots are cool and that we want to make some progress. Is there any other large reason for, one, first off, do we all agree it's alpha, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And we all agree that we kind of want it in 1.7 because we've been talking about it forever and this is tangible progress, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the next question then is, I agree with Brad. The designation between core and outside of core, is there a strict definition? I just looked up the definition of alpha, and when alpha, if you look at it, has 5 points. The version name it's labeled alpha. It could be buggy. The support of the feature could be dropped at any time without notice, and the API can change in very big backwards breaking incompatible ways, and it's only really meant to be used for short-lived clusters and not production. So to me, if we change that API heavily, if anyone's using snapshots in 1.7 and starts relying on those snapshots to, or this API to be around, it's kind of, shame on them. That's really not the state that it's in. That's what we have at alpha. So I'm not worried about that much. And as to security concerns, I think also that, it's something to think about for later, but as it's not an alpha, it's still in an alpha feature. I feel like that's also, not something that could be a main focus right now. It feels like right now, making sure that the consumers in the apps team and that the API is in solid shape should really be, our primary concern. I guess the question I'm asking is, what is the argument for having it be in core? Because we can always change that later, but pulling it out later is going to be harder.
I think the argument is just that that's the way we've done stuff in the past, and so that's what people are most familiar with. And even though it's kind of weird that this is an experimental, like the process to experiment with stuff is somewhat experimental, is what's causing a little bit of, unhappiness.
I think another thing is that if you're talking about like moving objects between namespaces, then that is something, if you're going to, we can push it for next release or something, but if you're going to do it from get-go, then there has to be some changes done in core API as well to support that kind of operation. So, but we can definitely go without that feature So moving snapshot between namespaces, and that's not a blocker.
Well, I also thought that this is one of the features that people is quite frequently asked for, so people expect it to work by default. But perhaps it's not. I don't know.
For me, the argument for alpha is clear update strategy to beta and GA. If you remember for how long we had alpha dynamic provisioning and people really used it and depended on it. I think this is going to follow the same concept.
You know, Jan, I don't think we should have a problem telling people alpha means alpha. I had the unfortunate experience of getting in front of a bunch of business customers and prospective business customers who had said exactly what you just said, which was we had an alpha feature, we loved it, we depended on it, and then you changed it. And this is really what it's about. And I think one of the strengths of Kubernetes is that our APIs are so well thought through that when they go to beta, it means a lot. And that's why I think Kubernetes has been successful. And if people depend on things being, I mean, if to reinforce what you just said, if people start depending on it, then putting it in core, and we don't want them to, putting it in core may be another signal to do so. And putting it outside of core is another way of saying, hey, you know, we're making progress on this, but please don't depend on this yet. I don't feel yet, I mean, does anyone feel really confident yet that we've nailed down the API and that it won't change?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Okay, good. So then, and by the way, this is, I think this is going to be a very pivotal feature going forward. So I'm glad that we are, you know, I'm very glad with the approach that we've taken to it. And I guess the more we talk about it, the more, my vote is maybe to keep it out of core for those two reasons. One, I don't see a reason to put it in. And two, it would provide another signal to customers and other people in the world that snapshots are cool, we're working on it, but don't depend on this API just yet.
Yeah, and you can go try it out. Here you can go try it out if you feel like really enough.
Yeah, and by the way, try it out and give us feedback.
Yes, exactly.
Just a question. So if we are making some non-core, so what's the plan to shift them back into core?
So I think that needs to be figured out, right? One is whether snapshots meets the bar to be something that is part of the core Kubernetes kernel. The bar is going to be very high. We need to provide justification that this is broadly useful and that you basically cannot run a Kubernetes cluster without it. I think there's hundreds of objects that have been introduced since the inception of Kubernetes, and there's a big pushback now to say very, very careful about what we adopt into the core, and anything that doesn't need to be part of the core can be a third-party resource that can be added on optionally. So that's something we'll have to
I think snapshots is critical for Kubernetes adoption, especially in production environments. We're hearing a lot of requirements from customers. So I'm pretty sure we can work out a justification there. In fact, I think having out of core, having it available to hand it to customers so that all of the snapshot can be administered from kubectl in one interface, I think it's going to go a long way in driving up the adoption. Because people going production definitely need this one.
So I'm not sure whether user-facing it's going to make that much of a difference between being a third-party resource and part of the core. As long as the third-party resource is installed on the cluster, I believe, and I might not be correct here, that you could interact with it the same way that you interact with first-party objects. So you should be able to kubectl create snapshots and things like that.
Would the third-party APIs stable enough that what we are written for snapshots, third-party APIs won't be interfered with the third-party, the object itself?
I'm not sure.
I want to bring up, I've used third-party resources a lot, Quartermaster, and we use them a lot in CoreOS. So we depend on them for production. So it is absolutely capable of creating applications for production. And it makes things much simpler because you can run applications that are outside the kernel and they're still being part of an overall picture to customers believe that it is part of the same operating system, that is Kubernetes, but it's just an extension. But it handles everything exactly the same way.
I agree with that. As long as the third-party APIs, the objects themselves are stable, then I don't really have objections. If we are running core, just we start from the outside. But if that shim is not so stable, then that becomes a question, because eventually we want them shift to core, and we want to have some productions running the third-party APIs.
That's okay. What I'm saying is that the movement to core is something that you can decide much later, but there's almost no need to do that because the container is going to handle the third-party resources, is going to be just a controller as if it was inside the kernel. So it's
that's mechanism. I agree with you. But the shim layer with the third-party API itself, the shim layer within the Kubernetes core that handles the third-party API. If that interface is changing, then we are sucked.
Well, that's just, you can say that about any API in Kubernetes. It is right now in beta 1, and it would need to be tracked.
Yeah.
I feel like we're converging on alpha out of core. Is there anyone fighting for in core?
I just wanted to ask a slightly maybe naive question, but as far as the underlying low-level implementation of the snapshot operations in the actual storage providers, does it matter whether the implementation is a third-party resource or a core object in terms of the API?
So that depends on whether the controller is going to be part of the core Kubernetes logic or the controller is going to be an external container. If we say that we're going to have the API be a third-party resource, but the logic will still remain within the kube controller manager, then we can use the existing plugins and just add a snapshotting API or interface to the existing plugins. But if we also decide to make the controller out of tree, then we're going to have to go with something like the dynamic provisioner, at least in the short term. We'll have to figure out what that means for CSI and how discovery needs to happen and things like that. It makes things more complicated.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, for what it's worth, it seems more useful to have a matrix of supported operations in the plugins all at the same level. Makes it really easy to add new storage types and things like that. But,
I can imagine that for alpha, we could have an out-of-tree controller that runs as a separate container that monitors these third-party resource API objects, and it triggers the correct behavior for snapshots. And it also contains the basically plugin code inside the container for each one of these plugins that wants to implement snapshots, and we could do that for alpha. And then in the future, if we decide that this is super critical, we could probably leave the API itself as a third-party resource, but move the logic into one of the primary controllers.
Okay.
I have a follow-up with that Mike's question. If we are going to do the in-tree snapshots controller, are we subject to the code freeze or the feature freeze states?
Yes. If we decide that right now for alpha, we're going to have either the API or the controller as in-tree, then yes, we are. If we decide that both are not going to be in-tree, both are going to be external, then we are not.
How about just the controller in-tree, the API is out of tree? Third-party API, but in-tree.
Anything that's in-tree is going to be subject to the code.
All right.
Actually, I really like the approach. Like, it makes the core very stable, right? Going this way. Like, is there an effort to make the third-party resources moving away from alpha? Because all of this depends on third-party resources, right? And if third-party resource itself is alpha.
They're not alpha, they're beta.
The beta, okay. Is it going to be completely GA soon? The reason why I'm asking.
You know what? Like, I think these are good conversations to have offline, but I want to make sure that we're driving towards the decision. Is there any reason to not have this be a third-party resource? I feel like what we've got now is we may have made a decision, and now it's like, okay, now that we've made the decision, how do we then start accelerating past that? But there's unfortunately some other 1.7 items for this meeting that we know we need to cover for other items too. So we have a lot of time to talk about snapshots. It has a weekly or a bi-weekly meeting. Have we made a decision? Have we not made a decision on Snap? We know it's alpha. I think that's been agreed upon. Have we made a decision on third-party resource or not? Is there any reason to not put it in third-party resource at this point for 1.7? Because we have to decide, and then we have to work really hard to get it in 1.7.
Is this a divergent change from what you guys have already done, that it's not going to make 1.7, Brad? Or is this still possible? Or is that how you always had it planned? I guess that's more the question.
The best path to success is third-party resource external controller.
Okay.
All right. Well, sorry, just keep bugging you. I know if, even for those controllers external, how about the plugin work? Because the plugins is better to be entry. Are they still?
We'll have to create just basically a mini plugin within the external controller that just has the snapshot interface. And then if we decide to pull the controller in tree, then we can consolidate that logic. But considering it's alpha, that's not horrible.
Yeah, and we can, I think if we can agree on the approach, then we can go over the details in our next snapshot.
All right. That's great.
Okay, and the only other big open issue around snapshots is presenting to the SIG API group. And I'm going to run this by you, Michael. Would it be okay for them to start work on this external provisioner, and then Jing has a meeting first week of June to present to SIG apps if there's any major changes they can incorporate it into their prototype?
No, I think it's a great idea.
Okay. How does that sound to everyone else?
I can ask everybody, not just me. I feel weird when you say just me.
Do you mind to send out the dates so we can just
Sure. I'll ask Jing to share that.
Thank you.
Cool. Awesome.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to mark this as started, and Brad and team, you guys can continue working on it. All right, next up, dynamic update of PVC PV. Hemant, did you have an update here?
No, not for this one.
Okay. But for number 13, adding support for resizing PVs, these are kind of related issues, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so for the resizing PVs, you sent out a proposal, and you added, I believe, an item to the agenda to discuss it later today?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just come back to that. Data replication depends on this functionality as well, so we'll come back to these three. Attach, detach, controller, restart, handling. Tomas, any updates here?
Nothing much. I got stuck on the snapshots last week.
Okay. Do you think you're going to be able to make code freeze?
Hopefully, yes. But well, there's one bug that needs to be fixed. I need to fix the oh no, it won't because please. Okay. I'm sorry. So, the solutions that have been proposed basically require API change. And I don't think I would be able to fix the second bug without it.
So if I recall correctly, there was a big PR that went in earlier.
That one is merged. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so what work was left in addition to that that hasn't been done or needs to?
During testing of the PR, we found that there is a condition where with certain sequence of action, it may happen that the volume that is attached to a node is not in node status.
Okay.
And such a volume is never detached, but it requires the controller to crash while attaching the volume, and the user delete the pod in the meantime. So it's quite a rare condition. We've discovered this only with testing. I don't know if any user has ever encountered it. So it's severity bug.
But this is not a regression from the last, the previous release, correct?
I don't know. I haven't seen previous release. I'm not that long with here. So
No, this is not a regression. It's just enhancement.
Okay. The primary issue that this fix was intended to fix, that has largely been addressed or not?
That's been fixed. That's been merged. That's done.
Okay, so let's we'll move this item over to 1.8 when we do the 1.8 planning, and we can finish the second half of this in 1.8 then.
Okay.
All right, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Next up, running stateful applications via federation plane. I'm just going to remove this item. It's not started. We're going to leave it here. We'll move it over to 1.8 if we need to. PVC capacity usage stats. There's been no progress here. Provisioning configuration in PVC. So this is a feature that says we already have dynamic provisioning storage classes. Storage classes themselves are constructed by cluster administrators, but potentially there are some subset of options that we would like users to be able to control, or a cluster administrator would like to expose to the user. Jan had a proposal around this early in the milestone. I'm not sure we made too much progress on it. I was talking to Tim Hawkins earlier this week, and he recommended that we put this high on the 1.8 agenda because, or on the 1.8 planning, because it's something that the networking team is starting to run into with Ingress. So whatever model that we come up with on the storage side is probably going to be adopted by other Kubernetes teams. Jan, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
No.
Okay, so we'll just make sure to prioritize that highly for 1.8. Improve containerization of mounts. Jan, any updates on this?
Yeah, I was on SIG Node meeting last Tuesday, and they are pretty reluctant to the changes are suggested. So,
what was the biggest concerns?
The mount propagation itself.
Okay.
They don't like it. They are afraid it breaks things. So they want it very experimental, and they want it basically running only in E2E tests, so we can test it before releasing to customers.
Okay.
So some changes, new command line options to kubelet, and I posted a PR just before this meeting. I hope it gets into 1.7, but I need an API change. So.
And the API change would be where?
Well, basically in definition of mounts in a pod. I need a field that
Got it.
It should be propagated or not.
And then this field would be controlled by pod security context?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And by default, it would not be allowed?
Yeah, sure. By default, everything is private.
Okay.
So I posted my changes, and I will see what they say.
Cool. Let's mark it as started. If we have to punt it to 1.8, no big deal.
Yeah, and I will post some PRs for storage soon. They don't need a propagation yet, but prepare the field for it.
Okay. All right, thanks. Next up is improving the current Chroot hack, which is like an intermediate solution between what Jan is proposing and what we have today. I believe Jing had some thoughts around this. I'm not sure how much progress she was able to make. She's not on the call right now, so we'll just leave that as is for now. Next up is fixing the broken volume reconstruction. Chakri, I know you pinged me a few times this week and I haven't had a chance to get back to you. Do you have any updates?
Yeah, I just put the proposal out there, I think, and had a few comments which got addressed. So we just need to nail down on the proposal, and then maybe I'll get you to work in the next week.
Okay. If you can, do you think you'd be able to have the code in by early next week so that we have enough time for code freeze by, which is Thursday?
I'll try my best, but we need to nail in the proposal and say that, okay, this looks okay to go. Yeah.
Okay. Let me take a look at the proposal today. If we can get sign off on it, then hopefully you can get started on coding it. I'd really, really like for us to get this in. Broken for a while, and if we can get this fixed, that would be awesome.
Okay.
Next up is the Storage OS volume plugin. Simon, any progress there?
Yeah, it's still ready for review. Raman had a first pass on it. Okay. I've just rebased it, so it's just going through the pipeline now.
Okay, cool. Any blocking issues?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, it would be great, if there's anything major or anything like that. I'm due to be away from next Tuesday, so it would be great to have a bit of time to fix them.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if somebody from Google take another last pass, that would be great. I'll look at it. It's in general good shape. So.
Okay.
Great.
I'll see if someone on our team can take a look at it. And then finally, we have the Azure Dd3 Factor.
Yeah, so I've been negotiating the vast forest of Microsoft, and we have people working on this now, so it's actually moving forward. And Brendan Burns is helping me coordinate people, and I'm meeting with a team in China tonight to talk about this specifically and work moving forward. So we're still trying to shoot for a 1.7 inclusion, but if that looks like it's going to slip to 1.8, I'll definitely let you know asynchronously or in the actual PR.
So Jason, this is Huang Min again.
Hi, Huang.
I read the PR. I really have some troubles with the PR, and because it was recreated again with the identical code, all the review history gets lost.
Okay.
So if you can have a sync-up meeting between you and the developer, I forgot his name, so we can talk face-to-face exactly what we want to make it happen. I made some general comments on PR, and hopefully that can be addressed. 1.7 looks like a stretch because the size of the PI is way beyond, it's overkill for small features like that. So if we can get this addressed in quick turnaround, maybe we can still make 1.7.
Okay. How do I connect with you? What's the best way to reach you?
Maybe you can just comment. You can find me on the GitHub. You can comment me on the PR, on the PR, and then call me out. Set up time. We can just start from there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, everybody. I just found out last night from the release manager, Don Chen, that there's something called the internal 1.7 Kubernetes. Oh, sorry. Wait. Do we have everything in the features repo, I think was the question that she wanted to know. All those items that we just had tracked?
So we should. So we have a column over here for whether the issue is being tracked in the feature repo. The only one that should be tracked that isn't in there is the Nfs Wedging Issue, and it looks like we're not going to have that make 1.7. So everything else looks like it has a feature.
And is everything also tied into the docs? There's that docs spreadsheet that they've got.
Yeah, so that is something we're gonna start following up with after code freeze. Usually the docs are written about a week or two into code freeze, so we have time for that.
So it looks like the Azure Dd refactor is not in there. But that's how do refactors figure as far as being a feature or not?
They're not features. Yeah, the way I kind of define features is that it's got to be new functionality.
Yeah, that's as I expected. I just sometimes.
Let's call it a bug fix.
Great, thanks.
Let me look at the other two here.
One question: is the introduction of a new volume plugin something that you guys consider a feature?
Yes. And they've been tracked in the features repo. I think the deadline for the features repo is passed, which is why if you don't have something in the features repo, it may require an exception or something that you really need to bring to the release team. And then in addition, there is the documentation. I think the documentation was the real thing that I think Dawn wanted us to get a kickstart on.
Okay, because I added this one again. I was hoping to talk about it later, but I'm planning to add a root volume plugin, and this is already pretty much done with testing it. And I was hoping to make it for 1.6 because I think the plugin is a very thin plugin. So all it does is that all the logic about provisioning, deleting, attaching, detaching is going to be handled by the Rook API itself. So it's a very thin plugin, and I'm really hoping that it could make for 1.7. Like I said, it's pretty much sitting, and I can submit a PR and an issue today. This week.
Would you be okay with holding it off for 1.8?
Is there? I mean, I would rather have a 1.7, but is there a reason why? I know.
So primarily what Michael was saying, which is normally we do feature planning at the beginning of the milestone for 1.7. That was a couple of months ago. The idea is that we create a features repo issue about what are the features that are going to go into this release. and the release team starts tracking them on what all the requirements are for that feature, and make sure that we have the documentation and everything that needs to go into the release notes for that feature. For us to get this feature in now, 1 week before code freeze, we would have to make a pretty big justification to the release team to say why this is something that we want to make an exception for. And I'd like us not to go through that process unless we really, really have to. So if you're okay with holding off to 1.8, that would probably be the best approach.
Well, actually, yeah, this is sort of your choice, not ours at all. This is just sort of how the process works.
Yeah.
The way we just described it, it's kind of like, this is what, we as SIG say. It's kind of bigger than SIG. So it's something to navigate. And if you need more help about it, I would send mail the SIG release, and they will tell you the steps and show you what to do.
Okay.
Just the big question I've got is everything that's targeted for 1.7 is in the features release repo, right? And if we don't think it's going to make it in 1.7, then we should probably update that too, because I think this is what Dawn is looking at now as she is combing through like with a spotlight on what needs to be done.
Okay, so would it be worth it for me to contact Don and see if we can make an exception and have this thin plugin for Rook for 1.7? Because like I said, the work is pretty much there. Just doing some basic testing right now. So I was wondering if maybe we can fit in be part of that exception.
So, you want to piggyback on another exception?
I just want to make sure, like everything, all PRs that are contributed have to go through a review. So has your PR, it sounds like there's no issue, no PR and no reviews at this point, and it's still like a week before code freeze.
Yeah, that's right. But that's what I'm saying, that this is a very thin plugin, and all it's doing is pretty much delegating, provisioning, deleting, attaching requests to the Rook API to handle all the work and all the logic, and all the meat is going to be there.
Would that be possible to run a flex volume?
The thing about flex volume is that it's very invasive and intrusive, because you have to go to all the node and add the plugin in there, and then you have to restart kubelet. So we did explore that, but we found it that it might not work with GKE, for example, because of that limitation of flex volume.
I think you guys are. I think you guys are right. We'll definitely let's put the PR in issue, and we'll deal with the exception.
Bassam, could you speak up? We're having trouble hearing you.
Hey, can you guys hear me now?
It's a little bit better.
Okay, is this better now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, sorry. We should definitely, we're going to submit the PR and issue now. Well, let's take the exception process offline if needed at all.
Okay.
So I'm sorry we're late. We're kind of starting to get used to the process. This is our first major change in the Kubernetes process, but we'll see if we can make an exception or not, but let's do that offline.
Cool, sounds good. Thank you. Any other items on the agenda? So there's a couple of PRs that need attention, local storage plugin. Michelle, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this has been out for a while now. I think I don't plan on, or it's pretty much at a stable point now. So it's ready to go in pending review. Yeah, I've already gotten comments, a lot of comments from people, especially Huamin, I think. So yeah,
Okay.
just good to get a final review.
Cool. I'll take a look at it too. And hopefully you can get that in. Next up is Portworx plugin for GKE.
GKE?
Fix Portworx plugin for GKE. So apparently it's been broken for GKE.
Yeah, I am reviewing it,
Okay.
and it looks okay.
Jan reviewing.
I'll go ahead and review that too from the GKE side.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle. All right. Design reviews. I'm not sure we're going to have time to do any of these. We have 2 minutes left in this meeting. We can punt these to the next meeting. We're going to punt the onboarding docs to the next meeting. And that's it. Is there anything anyone wants to talk about in the last minute? All right. Take care, and thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.